In the quiet, picturesque town of Hillbrook, a string of seemingly unrelated burglaries and minor crimes goes unnoticed by the community. That is, until a strange and cryptic tip comes through a local hotline, pointing investigators toward something far more sinister than anyone had anticipated. What follows is a deep dive into a case that threatens to unravel everything the town thought it knew about its own residents, revealing a web of secrets, lies, and a cold-blooded killer hiding in plain sight. Welcome back to another chilling tale here at Beneath the Surface, the dark side of crime. In today's episode, we dive deep into a crime that almost slipped through the cracks, until an anonymous tip forced the truth to surface. Join us as we unravel a web of secrets in the small town of Hillbrook, a place where everyone knows your name, but no one knew the darkness lurking just beneath the surface. Stay tuned, and remember, when the truth is buried, it's only a matter of time before it's uncovered. The quiet town of Hillbrook was the kind of town that could have been taken from the pages of a picture book. Nestled in the hills with wide, tree-lined streets and charming homes with white picket fences, it was the place where nothing ever seemed out of place. Everyone knew everyone, and that familiarity gave the residents a sense of security. It was the kind of town where you didn't lock your doors at night, and where your biggest worry might be whether or not it would rain during the weekend's annual fair. But beneath the picturesque surface, Hillbrook harbored secrets. Secrets that had been buried so deep, they had long been forgotten by most. And, like all secrets, they had a way of resurfacing when least expected. The story begins with a simple phone call. It was an early Tuesday morning when Detective Rachel Monroe received the call that would change everything. She had been working the Hillbrook beat for several years, but this was different. Hillbrook had its share of minor crimes, burglary, vandalism, petty theft, but nothing serious. Nothing that warranted the attention of the town's finest investigator. That was, until the anonymous tip came through. The message was cryptic, barely more than a few words, but Rachel's instincts told her it was important. The voice on the other end of the line was shaky, panicked, as though the caller was trying to warn her without getting caught. "They don't want you to know," the voice had said, its tone low, almost frantic. "There's something bigger going on in Hillbrook. The burglaries are just the beginning." Rachel's mind raced. She'd been investigating a series of minor crimes, missing bikes, broken windows, small break-ins, but nothing had ever seemed to tie them together. In a town as quiet as Hillbrook, these were the sorts of things that could be easily dismissed as kids looking for trouble. But now, this call suggested something much darker. The voice continued. "Start with Jared Lawson, his family's estate. You'll find the truth there." The call ended abruptly. Rachel sat back in her chair, staring at the phone. Jared Lawson. The name was familiar. He was a local businessman who owned several properties in the area, including the sprawling Lawson estate that had been in his family for generations. He was well-liked in the community, charismatic, charming, and seemingly the perfect example of small-town success. But there was something about the way the tipster had said his name that felt off. Jared Lawson. Rachel didn't know why, but the mention of his name sent a chill down her spine. She immediately set her plans in motion, ready to investigate what could be the break in a case no one even realized had started. A pattern emerges. The first stop on Rachel's investigation was Jared Lawson's family estate. She had no reason to believe the businessman was involved in any criminal activity, but the tipster's words gnawed at her. The estate sat on the edge of Hillbrook, a grand old mansion with ivy creeping up its stone walls. It was a place that seemed to have been frozen in time, with its old-world charm hiding a long history of privilege and power. Rachel had heard whispers of Lawson's wealth and influence in town, but those were just rumors, nothing she could pin down as fact. As Rachel drove up the long, winding road to the estate, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. The trees along the path were thick and dense, creating a canopy that blocked out the morning sun, casting eerie shadows on the ground. When she reached the front door, she rang the bell, her heart pounding in her chest. Jared Lawson opened the door with a smile that seemed practiced and genuine. "Detective Monroe, how can I help you?" he asked, his tone smooth and confident. Rachel introduced herself and mentioned that she was looking into a series of recent burglaries. She didn't want to accuse Lawson of anything outright. He hadn't done anything wrong, at least not yet, but the tip had made her curious. Lawson had nothing to hide, or so he appeared. He invited her in, offering coffee as they talked about the recent crimes in town. "I'm sorry to hear about the break-ins," Lawson said, his expression sincere. "We've all been on edge since it started, but I'm sure it's just a phase. Kids looking for trouble? I'm sure of it." Rachel nodded, watching him carefully. Something about his calm demeanor didn't sit right with her. He was too polished, too controlled. She knew from experience that when people tried too hard to be perfect, it often meant they had something to hide. She decided to probe a little further, asking if there had been anything unusual happening on his property recently. Lawson seemed momentarily taken aback, his eyes flickering with uncertainty before he quickly masked it with a smile. "No, nothing out of the ordinary. My family and I are just trying to keep to ourselves," he said, his voice betraying just the slightest hesitation. Rachel made a mental note. He was hiding something. But what? Uncovering hidden truths? Rachel's next move was to start speaking with the other townspeople. Hillbrook, though small, was full of characters who had their own suspicions and rumors. One of the first people she spoke to was Sophia Turner, a young woman who had moved to Hillbrook only a few months ago. Sophia had seemed to be keeping to herself, but something about her eyes suggested she knew more than she was letting on. Sophia explained that she'd seen someone she didn't recognize in the neighborhood around the time of one of the burglaries. She described him as a tall man, dressed in dark clothes, his face partially obscured by a hood. It wasn't much to go on, but it was enough for Rachel to start digging into the timing and locations of the crimes. Sophia's testimony aligned with the pattern Rachel was starting to form. It wasn't random. The burglaries were happening in specific neighborhoods, often near areas that were linked to Jared Lawson's business interests. But there was more. There was something even darker beneath the surface. As Rachel pieced together the clues, she realized that Hillbrook's quiet reputation might have been hiding a much darker truth. The handyman's secret. As Rachel Monroe delved deeper into the mystery, another name began to surface. Billy Harmon. He was the town handyman, a quiet, unassuming man who spent his days fixing broken fences, repairing leaky roofs, and doing odd jobs for the residents of Hillbrook. He had a reputation for being kind-hearted and hard-working, always willing to lend a hand. But as Rachel dug into his background, she began to notice a series of small, inconspicuous details that hinted at something darker. Billy had been in Hillbrook longer than most, and though he had few close friends, he was a fixture of the town. Everyone knew him, yet no one seemed to know much about his personal life. He didn't have family in town, and his social circle consisted mostly of clients and neighbors. But there was one thing that stood out. Rachel had learned from several sources that Billy had a history of minor run-ins with the law. Nothing serious, just a few reports of fights at local bars, small thefts from his neighbors, and a questionable arrest record from his youth. None of these things seemed to have been enough to raise suspicion, but to Rachel they all painted a picture of a man with something to hide. It wasn't until she spoke to an elderly woman named Eleanor, who had known Billy for years, that the first real clue came to light. Eleanor, a lifelong resident of Hillbrook, had seen Billy around the neighborhood every day for as long as she could remember. When Rachel asked her about Billy, Eleanor's demeanor shifted slightly, as if she was holding back something. "Billy's a quiet one, always keeps to himself," Eleanor said, her voice wavering slightly. "But a few years ago, I saw him at the old Lawson estate. He was talking to Jared. Quite a heated conversation, if you ask me. I don't know what it was about, but I could tell something wasn't right." Rachel's interest piqued. She had already suspected some sort of connection between Jared Lawson and the growing number of criminal activities, and now this bit of information seemed too significant to ignore. Billy Harmon had been near the estate just a few years ago, long before the recent string of burglaries. But why would a seemingly harmless handyman be in a heated discussion with Jared Lawson? She decided to pay Billy a visit. The confession. The following afternoon, Rachel drove to Billy's modest home at the edge of town. His house was small, with overgrown hedges and a rusting car parked in the driveway. It looked just like the homes of most of Hillbrook's long-term residents. Nothing extraordinary, just a quiet life. Billy answered the door with a smile, though it didn't quite reach his eyes. He looked older than his age, the years of hard work and solitude wearing on him. Rachel introduced herself, and after a brief conversation, Billy reluctantly invited her in for coffee. "Something on your mind, detective?" Billy asked, settling into his armchair, his hands fidgeting with the edge of his shirt. "I don't usually get visitors, so I'm guessing you're here about the crimes." Rachel nodded. "That's right. I've heard you were in the area near the Lawson estate a few years ago. Is that true?" Billy's face immediately tightened, and for a moment, Rachel thought he might deny it. But then, after a long pause, he spoke quietly. "Yeah, I was there. I did some work for Jared back then, a few repairs around the estate. It was a good job, kept me busy for a while, but there was something I saw there that I wish I hadn't." Billy's voice trailed off, and Rachel could see the guilt in his eyes. "What did you see?" she asked, her voice calm but urgent. Billy hesitated before answering. I saw Jared, doing something he shouldn't have. He was with a woman I'd never seen before. They were arguing in one of the rooms at the back of the house. It wasn't just a disagreement, it was violent. I never heard the words, but the way they were shouting, I've never seen Jared like that. After that, I was just glad to get out of there and get paid. But now, I don't know what's going on, but I think it's all connected." Billy's words sent a shiver down Rachel's spine. Jared Lawson, the golden boy of Hillbrook, the man everyone trusted, had been involved in something far darker than anyone could have imagined. "I didn't want to get involved," Billy continued, his voice growing softer. "But something's wrong here, detective. Something's been wrong for a long time. I just didn't want to be a part of it." The search for answers. Rachel had a knot in her stomach as she left Billy's house. What she had just learned could be the key to everything. Jared Lawson's involvement in whatever was happening in Hillbrook now seemed more than likely. Billy had seen something he shouldn't have, and it appeared he was just one of many people who had stumbled across Jared's darker side. Rachel's mind raced as she pieced everything together. The string of burglaries, the hidden family estate, Billy's strange behavior, and the mysterious anonymous tip. It was all starting to make sense. But what was the connection between all of these things? As she made her way back to the station, Rachel found herself reflecting on the tip she'd received. She had assumed it was just a call from a paranoid citizen or someone with a vendetta. But now she realized that the person who had sent it knew exactly what was happening in Hillbrook. Whoever they were trying to expose the truth, and they were counting on Rachel to be the one to uncover it. Back at the station, Rachel pulled up the records on Jared Lawson. The more she dug, the more disturbing the picture became. Jared's business dealings seemed to be a front for something much more sinister. There were whispers about money laundering, shady connections with criminals from out of town, and the strange disappearances of several people who had been involved with his businesses in the past. But what was the connection to the murders? Why had the tipster pointed her toward Lawson in the first place? Rachel's phone buzzed as she reviewed the case files. It was a text from Sophia Turner. "Detective, I think I found something. I remember seeing a man at the Lawson estate a few weeks ago. He looked out of place, and I think he was trying to hide something. I don't know what it is, but I think it's worth looking into." The pieces were falling into place, and Rachel knew the hidden past. As Rachel Monroe sifted through the stacks of case files, she couldn't help but feel like a crucial piece of the puzzle was still missing. Everything seemed to point toward Jared Lawson. His shady dealings, the mysterious disappearances, the hidden tensions between him and Billy Harmon. But she needed more than just circumstantial evidence. She needed the truth, and the only way to uncover it was to dig deeper into Jared's past. Rachel decided to visit the Hillbrook Historical Society. If there was any record of the Lawson family's activities or any hidden secrets, it was likely to be found in the dusty old files stacked in the Society's archives. The building itself was a relic of Hillbrook's past, a two-story brick structure with ivy creeping up the walls and a small front porch lined with rocking chairs. As Rachel stepped inside, she was greeted by Ellen Dawson, the Society's curator. Ellen was an elderly woman with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. She had lived in Hillbrook her entire life and had seen it all, or so she claimed. "Detective Monroe, I suppose you're here to dig up some old dirt on the Lawson family?" Ellen asked with a wry smile as she led Rachel into the back room where the archives were kept. Rachel didn't respond immediately, instead letting her curiosity guide her as she followed Ellen to a large wooden table cluttered with faded documents and old photographs. "What can you tell me about Jared Lawson and his family?" Rachel asked. "Anything out of the ordinary?" Ellen raised an eyebrow. "Jared's family is one of the oldest in Hillbrook. They've been here for generations, built most of the town's major buildings. But, like many old families, they've had their share of scandals. Scandals that were swept under the rug." "Scandals?" Rachel's interest piqued. Ellen leaned in, lowering her voice. "You see, Jared's father, Harlan Lawson, was involved in something that was never fully investigated. There were rumors, but nothing concrete. And then, suddenly, Harlan died in a car accident. Mysteriously, of course. People said it was an accident, but some of us believed it was no accident at all." Rachel felt a chill run down her spine. A mysterious death? This could be the lead she'd been waiting for. "Do you have any records of Harlan's death?" Rachel asked. Ellen nodded and pulled out a thick folder from one of the shelves. It was filled with old newspaper clippings, handwritten notes, and police reports. Rachel flipped through the papers, her eyes narrowing as she found an article about Harlan Lawson's death. The headline read, "Local businessman killed in car crash. Investigation closed." But the details were strange. The car had crashed late at night and there had been no signs of braking. The police had ruled it an accident, but a few lines in the report mentioned the possibility of foul play, although nothing was ever pursued further. The case was quickly closed, and the town moved on. Rachel flipped through more pages, uncovering a pattern of unresolved issues surrounding Harlan Lawson's business dealings. He had been involved in several controversial land acquisitions, some of which had led to the forced removal of local residents. There were whispers of bribery, shady financial transactions, and even a few accusations of blackmail. Could these have something to do with what's going on now? Rachel muttered to herself. Ellen, who had been watching Rachel closely, spoke up. "Harlan's death didn't just affect the Lawson family, you know. There were a lot of people who wanted answers, but after his death the town went quiet. Jared took over the family business and the whole thing was swept under the rug. The people who were once affected by Harlan's actions disappeared, or at least that's what we were told." Rachel stared at the documents, her mind racing. Harlan Lawson's death had been the catalyst that sent the town into silence, but it seemed that Jared had inherited not only his father's wealth but also the shadows of his father's crimes. The shocking revelation. With the new information in hand, Rachel knew it was time to confront Jared Lawson. She had enough to make him sweat, enough to put him on the defensive, but she still didn't have the whole truth. And she was certain that Jared was hiding something that could turn the entire case upside down. She called him, arranging a meeting at his office in downtown Hillbrook. The office, located in a sleek glass building, was a far cry from the old-world charm of his family estate. It spoke to Jared's modern ambitions and his desire to separate himself from the shadows of his past. When Rachel arrived, Jared greeted her with his usual polished smile. "Detective Monroe, what can I do for you today?" "I've been looking into your family's history, Jared," Rachel began, watching for his reaction. "It seems your father's death wasn't as simple as it appeared. There were rumors about bribery, corruption, even blackmail, and now there are reports linking you to a series of crimes in this town." Jared's smile faltered for just a second before he regained his composure. "My father's death was a tragic accident, Detective, and as for your other allegations, they're just rumors. Nothing more." Rachel leaned forward. "I don't think so. Your father's business dealings have left a trail, and I believe you've continued down the same path. The burglaries, the missing people, the connections to your estate, it all adds up." Jared's eyes flickered with something. Anger, guilt, fear. It was hard to tell. He clenched his jaw tightly before speaking. "Detective, you're digging in the wrong direction. Hillbrook doesn't want to know the truth about what happened here. It's better if you just walk away." Rachel's heart raced as she realized that Jared wasn't just trying to protect himself. He was trying to protect something bigger, something that had been buried for years. "You're not the only one with secrets, Jared," she said quietly. "I know about the woman, your father's connection to her, and I know you've been hiding something. The truth is coming out, whether you like it or not." Jared's expression darkened, and for the first time, Rachel saw the real Jared Lawson, someone desperate to keep control over a past that threatened to destroy him. "I don't know what you think you've uncovered, Detective," Jared said, his voice cold and controlled. "But I suggest you be careful. Some things are better left buried." The final piece of the puzzle. Rachel walked away from the meeting with a sense of urgency. Jared Lawson was hiding something, a truth so dangerous that he was willing to threaten her to keep it hidden. But what was it? What was he trying to protect? The missing piece of the puzzle came in an unexpected way. That evening, Rachel received another anonymous tip. This one was different from the first. It wasn't a phone call, but a letter, handwritten in neat, precise script. The letter simply read, "You're getting close, but there's more than just one body in Hillbrook's past. Look into the old church at the edge of town. There you'll find the truth about what Jared is hiding." Rachel's heart skipped a beat. The old church? She had driven past it countless times but had never thought to look there. Now, it seemed like the answer to the town's darkest secret was waiting for her. The next day, Rachel visited the church. As she stepped inside, the musty smell of old wood and forgotten memories filled her nostrils. The church had been abandoned for years, its stained glass windows cracked and its pews covered in dust. But Rachel noticed something unusual, fresh footprints leading toward the back. She followed the trail to a small storage room, where she found a hidden compartment beneath the floorboards. Inside, there was an old box carefully wrapped in cloth. When Rachel opened it, she was stunned to find photographs, photos of a woman she recognized from the town's past. It was the same woman she had heard about in the rumors surrounding Harlan Lawson's death. And then she saw it, an old newspaper clipping dated years ago that revealed the shocking truth. The woman had been murdered, and the one responsible? None other than Jared Lawson himself. Rachel's mind raced as she prepared for the inevitable confrontation. Jared's web of lies was vast, but now she had the evidence to tear it down. She knew she couldn't let him slip away again. She had to confront him, once and for all. The meeting was set for the next afternoon. Rachel arrived at the Lawson estate, the grand mansion looming before her like a fortress. She had walked through its doors before, but this time she knew what was at stake. She wasn't walking in as a guest, but as the one who would bring Jared Lawson's empire crashing down. Jared was waiting for her in his office, sitting behind his desk with a glass of whiskey in hand. The air between them was thick with tension, and for the first time, Rachel saw something in Jared's eyes that wasn't just arrogance or self-assurance. It was fear. "Detective Monroe," Jared said, his voice smooth but strained. "I was wondering when you'd come for me. It seems you found everything you're looking for." Rachel placed the file she had been carrying onto the desk, the weight of it pressing down between them. The photographs, the letters, the newspaper clippings. Everything was there. She was holding the evidence that would expose him for the monster he truly was. "Everything, Jared," she said quietly. "Everything about Evelyn Gray, your father's death, the years of cover-ups. It's all here." Jared's face remained stoic, but Rachel could see the shift in his demeanor. The calm, composed man she had once seen now seemed like a person backed into a corner. "You think you know everything, don't you?" Jared said with a forced chuckle. "You think you figured it all out, but you're wrong. You have no idea what it's like, what I had to do to survive." Rachel narrowed her eyes. "Survive? You didn't just survive, Jared. You killed. You took someone's life to protect your secrets, and you've spent years covering it up." Jared's eyes darkened, and for a moment the mask he had worn for so long slipped. "You don't understand," he muttered. "My father was a monster. He did terrible things to people, to my mother. He ruined so many lives, including mine. I had no choice but to protect myself." Rachel didn't flinch. She had heard enough from him. "Evelyn Gray was just one of many people you hurt, but she wasn't the only one. There were others, people you used, people you discarded when they no longer served your purpose. I found the records, Jared. I found the truth about your father's business dealings, and I found the truth about your father's death. He didn't die by accident, did he?" Jared's face contorted with rage, but there was also a deep sadness in his eyes. "You don't know what it was like, growing up with him. He was a monster, and I had to do whatever it took to get away from him. I loved him, but I also hated him. He was cruel. He ruined everything, including my future." Rachel leaned forward. "That doesn't give you the right to kill anyone, and it doesn't give you the right to keep killing to protect your empire. You've been hiding behind your wealth, your charm, your business, but it's all coming down now, Jared. It's over." Jared stood up, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. "You think it's that simple?" His voice was sharp, almost desperate now. "You think you can just walk in here and tear everything down? You don't understand what's at stake. The lives I've ruined. It's all part of the bigger picture. It's too late to fix it." Rachel stood her ground. "It's never too late for justice, Jared. Not for Evelyn, not for the others, and not for Hillbrook." For a moment, the room was silent. Jared looked at the file on the desk and then back at Rachel. He knew it was over. His empire, his carefully constructed facade, was crumbling around him. And in the end, he was left with only one choice. The arrest. As Rachel placed the handcuffs on Jared Lawson, she could feel the weight of the moment settling in. She had done it. She had exposed the man who had held Hillbrook in his grip for so long. But as she led him out of his office and toward the waiting patrol car, she couldn't shake the feeling that the town would never be the same again. Jared didn't resist as he was escorted outside, his head down, his face a mixture of anger and resignation. The townspeople who had gathered outside the estate were silent, watching the scene unfold before them. There were no cheers, no shouts of triumph, just a collective breath of relief, as if the town was exhaling after holding its breath for decades. Rachel didn't feel the satisfaction she had expected. There was no sense of victory. Instead, there was only the quiet knowledge that the truth had come to light, and that Hillbrook, for all its charm and tranquility, was forever changed. As the patrol car pulled away from the estate, Rachel couldn't help but wonder how many other towns, how many other people were hiding similar secrets. How many others were living in the shadows of crimes that had gone unnoticed for too long. She looked back at the mansion one last time as the car drove off. Jared Lawson's empire had fallen, but the darkness he had created would linger long after he was gone. The aftermath. In the weeks that followed, Hillbrook struggled to come to terms with the truth. The trial of Jared Lawson became a media frenzy, with reporters from all over the country descending on the small town to cover the case. But while the town's secrets were finally being exposed, The scars they had left behind were not so easily healed. Many residents were shocked to learn about Jared's involvement in the murder of Evelyn Gray, as well as the other crimes he had committed to maintain his power. Some felt betrayed, others were simply numb. But one thing was clear: Hillbrook would never be the same again. For Rachel, the case was bittersweet. She had brought justice to those who had suffered under Jared's reign, but there was still the lingering question of why it had taken so long for the truth to come to light. How many lives could have been saved if someone had spoken up sooner? How many people had been affected by Jared's lies and manipulations? As she sat in her office reflecting on everything that had transpired, she knew one thing for certain: the fight for justice was never over. It would always be there, lurking beneath the surface, waiting to be uncovered. Rachel Monroe continued to visit Hillbrook, making sure that the town was starting to heal from the trauma it had endured. There were still questions, of course. People wondered how they had been so blind to Jared's actions, how they had failed to see the warning signs that had been right in front of them for years. But more than that, people questioned the role of silence and complicity. How much had the town known, or suspected, but done nothing about? Rachel couldn't help but think about Evelyn Gray. She had been the key to unraveling everything, but she had also been the victim. No one had truly known her, not the way they should have. Her life had been tragically short, and her death had been buried under the weight of Jared's lies. It wasn't until Rachel found herself sitting in a small cafe, nursing a cup of coffee, that she realized how deeply the case had affected her. It was clear that Hillbrook wasn't just dealing with the aftermath of Jared's crimes. They were confronting something even deeper: their own guilt. The collective silence that had enabled his reign would take time to undo. Her phone buzzed, breaking her from her thoughts. It was a message from Sophia Turner, the woman who had been one of the first to bring attention to the strange behavior in town. "Detective, I've been thinking. I don't know if it's the right time, but I feel like we all need closure. What happened to Evelyn? We can't just leave it like that. We owe her more than that." Sophia's words hit Rachel hard. She had been right, of course. Hillbrook had to reckon with its past, and it wasn't enough for the case to simply end with Jared's conviction. The town needed to remember Evelyn and confront the way the darkness had festered for so long. Rachel made a decision. She would work with the local authorities to ensure that Evelyn's story was told in full, not just as a murder victim, but as a person whose life had been taken far too early. It was time for the town to face not only the actions of Jared Lawson, but the collective responsibility that had allowed his cruelty to persist. The town's reckoning. The decision to hold a memorial for Evelyn Gray was met with mixed feelings by the residents of Hillbrook. Some saw it as a necessary step toward healing, while others felt it was an intrusion on their quiet lives. But for Rachel, it was important that the town acknowledge the woman whose life had been sacrificed to Jared's ambition and the town's indifference. The memorial service was held in the very same church where Rachel had uncovered the clues that led to the unraveling of the case. The town had come together, albeit reluctantly, to remember the life of Evelyn Gray. As Rachel stood at the back of the church watching the proceedings unfold, she couldn't help but feel a deep sense of sorrow mixed with a flicker of hope. There, in the front pews, sat Billy Harmon, the quiet handyman who had revealed so much more than he knew. He was one of the few who had seen through the facade, but even he had been too afraid to speak up until it was too late. His presence at the memorial was a small act of redemption, a symbol that even the most overlooked person could find the strength to confront their past. Sophia Turner stood at the podium, delivering a heartfelt eulogy for Evelyn. She was more than just a victim, Sophia said, her voice strong yet filled with emotion. She was a daughter, a sister, and a friend. She had a life ahead of her, dreams she never got to fulfill. And though her life was taken too soon, she's reminded us of something important, of the power of speaking the truth. As Sophia finished, there was a long silence in the church. Then, one by one, the people of Hillbrook stood and shared their memories of Evelyn. Some spoke of small kindnesses she had shown, while others talked about how little they had known her. But there was a collective understanding now, a shared commitment to no longer allow silence to rule their lives. Rachel knew that this was the beginning of the town's healing process. It would take time, and there would still be pain, but this was the first step. A town that had once lived in the shadow of a powerful man was now beginning to step into the light. Moving forward. In the weeks following the memorial, Rachel felt a shift in the town. It was subtle at first, a change in the way people interacted with one another, but it was there. People were more open, more willing to speak out, and most importantly, they were more aware of the dangers of silence. Rachel's work in Hillbrook was far from over. She continued to help local law enforcement with cold cases, ensuring that no more secrets would be buried under the weight of power and influence. And though the case of Jared Lawson had come to a close, Rachel knew that Hillbrook's true test would be the work they did in the aftermath, learning to live with the truth, no matter how painful it was. As for Jared, his trial had been only the beginning. He was facing multiple charges, including murder, conspiracy, and a host of other crimes that had been committed over the years. His conviction would ensure that he spent the rest of his life behind bars. But for Rachel, the real victory was the town's newfound resolve to never again let such a thing happen in silence. And so, Hillbrook is left to rebuild after the truth has finally come to light. Jared Lawson's reign of terror may be over, but the scars left by his actions will take time to heal. For the residents of this quiet town, the lessons they've learned will echo for years to come. Remember, no secret can stay buried forever, and justice, no matter how long it takes, will always find a way to the surface. Thank you for joining us here at Beneath the Surface, the dark side of crime. We'll be back next time with another chilling story that reminds us all of the darkness that can exist beneath even the most peaceful of facades. Until then, stay vigilant. When the truth is buried, it's only a matter of time before it's uncovered.